The smell of reheated turkey and sage stuffing still lingered in the air as Alison Reed pulled into her parents' driveway on that grey November evening. The familiar two-story colonial sat under the warm glow of porch lights, its windows glowing yellow against the early winter darkness. She'd made this drive from downtown Austin to the suburbs countless times over the years, but tonight felt different somehow. Heavier. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Morrison Industries approved the fourth quarter campaign. They want to extend the contract through next year. Congrats. Alison smiled, pocketing the phone. At 28, her digital marketing consultancy was finally hitting its stride. 3 years of 18-hour days, networking events, and sleeping on her office couch were paying off. The Morrison account alone would gross her company $180,000 next year. She grabbed the bottle of wine from her passenger seat, a nice Pinot Noir she'd picked up downtown, and walked up the flagstone path her father had installed 2 summers ago. The same path she'd helped pay for when his construction business hit a rough patch. "Allie!" Her mother Linda's voice carried through the screen door before it even opened. "Perfect timing. I just pulled the leftover casserole out of the oven." Linda Reed was 53 but looked older, her auburn hair now more grey than red. Worry lines etched around her green eyes. She'd been beautiful once. Alison had inherited her high cheekbones and lean frame, but years of financial stress had worn her down. "Smells amazing, Mom." Alison hugged her, noting how thin her mother had gotten since the medical bills started piling up. The breast cancer scare last year had been expensive, even with insurance. "Your father's carving the turkey. The twins beat you here for once." Linda's voice carried that particular brand of maternal exhaustion that came from managing adult children who still acted like teenagers. Alison followed her mother through the familiar hallway, past family photos that chronicled better times. There she was at 18, valedictorian of her high school class. Jake and Emma at their high school graduation 2 years ago, grinning identical smiles. The family vacation to Colorado when the twins were 16 and Alison was a college sophomore, the last trip they'd taken before money got really tight. The dining room was warm and inviting, the oak table her parents had bought as newlyweds set with the good china. Her father Robert sat at the head, methodically slicing turkey with the electric knife that had been a wedding gift 29 years ago. At 46, he still had the broad shoulders of the college football player he'd been, but his dark hair was now salt and pepper, and the confidence he'd once carried like armor had been shaken by too many professional disappointments. "There's my successful daughter," he said without looking up from the turkey. "How's business?" "Good. Really good, actually." Alison settled into her usual chair, the one that faced the kitchen. "We just landed a major account." "That's wonderful, honey," Linda bustled in with a steaming casserole dish. "You work so hard." Across from her, Jake and Emma Reed looked up from their phones with matching expressions of mild interest. At 24, the twins still lived at home, still treated the house like a hotel with free food service. Jake had their father's build but none of his work ethic, while Emma had inherited their mother's delicate features and artistic temperament, along with her talent for avoiding responsibility. "What kind of account?" Emma asked, not really caring but making conversation. "Tech startup. They want a full rebrand and digital campaign." Alison served herself some green bean casserole, the same recipe her grandmother used to make. "It's a 2-year contract." "Nice." Jake didn't look up from his phone. "That means you can finally afford a house, right? Instead of that tiny apartment downtown?" Alison's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I like my apartment, and it's not tiny." "It's like 900 square feet, Emma said with a laugh. "For what you probably pay in rent, you could have a mortgage on a real place." "I'm not ready to buy yet." Alison kept her voice level. The truth was more complicated. Between helping her family and building her business, she hadn't been able to save for a down payment. Every time she got close, there was another crisis, another emergency that required her help. "Smart," their father said, finally setting down the carving knife. "Real estate market's crazy right now anyway. Better to wait." Speaking of real estate, Jake said with that casual tone that usually preceded something important. "Emma and I were talking to Mom and Dad about the future. You know, long-term planning." Alison felt something cold settle in her stomach. What kind of planning? Jake exchanged a look with Emma, the kind of twin telepathy they'd had since childhood. "Just so there's no confusion later," he said, his voice taking on a self-satisfied edge. "Everything goes to us. The house, the lake cabin, Mom and Dad's savings accounts, all of it." The words hit Alison like a physical blow. She set down her fork, her appetite disappearing. "Excuse me?" "The inheritance," Emma said matter-of-factly, cutting her turkey into precise little pieces. "Mum and Dad decided it all goes to Jake and me." Alison looked at her parents, waiting for them to correct this misunderstanding. Her mother was studying her plate intently, while her father had suddenly become very interested in the wine bottle. "Is this serious?" Alison's voice came out smaller than she intended. Her mother finally looked up, her expression a mixture of guilt and forced brightness. "Honey, you're already so successful. You have your business, your apartment downtown, your whole career. You don't need—" "Need what?" Alison interrupted. "Need to be included in my own family?" "That's not what this is about," her father said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he wanted to end discussions. "You chose your path, and you chose it well. We're proud of you. But Jake and Emma still need to get established. They need the help more." Alison stared at him. "Get established?" Jake is 24. Emma is 24. When exactly are they planning to start getting established? "That's not fair," Emma said, her voice sharp. "Not everyone can be perfect like you, Alison. Some of us are still figuring things out." "Figuring things out?" Alison felt her composure slipping. "Emma, you've been figuring things out for 6 years. And Jake, when was the last time you held a job for more than 3 months?" "Hey, that's not—" Jake started. "No, let me finish." Alison stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "For the past 6 years, I've been the one bailing this family out of every financial crisis. When Dad got laid off from the construction company, who paid the mortgage for 8 months? When Emma racked up 15 grand in credit card debt buying art supplies for her career, who paid that off? When Jake's food truck business failed and he defaulted on his loan, who covered that?" The silence was deafening. Her family sat frozen, as if she'd just said something obscene. "That was different," her mother said weakly. "That was family helping family." "And this?" Alison gestured at the table, at the comfortable house around them. "What is this?" "This is family taking care of family too," her father said. "Jake and Emma are going to need this house. They're going to need the cabin. You already have everything you need." Alison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everything I need. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to help this family? Do you know how many opportunities I've turned down, how many investments I couldn't make, how many times I've chosen your financial stability over my own future?" "Nobody asked you to do that," Jake said, his voice defensive. "Nobody asked me?" Alison turned to stare at him. "Nobody asked me when you called crying about the loan payments. Nobody asked me when Emma was getting eviction notices. Nobody asked me when Mom needed help with her medical bills." "That's enough," their father said sharply. "We appreciate everything you've done, but that doesn't mean—" "Doesn't mean what? Doesn't mean I'm still your daughter. Doesn't mean I deserve to be treated like part of this family instead of like some external resource you can tap whenever convenient." Her mother's eyes were filling with tears. "Ali, please, you're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" Alison pulled out her phone, scrolling through her banking app. "Let me show you dramatic. This is my business account. You see this transfer from 3 days ago? $4,500 to Hill Country Medical Center. That was for Dad's physical therapy that insurance didn't cover. And this one from last month? $2,000 to Emma for her emergency car repair." She kept scrolling, her voice getting stronger with each revelation. "And this beauty, $8,000 in September when Jake needed bail money after that DUI. Oh, and let's not forget this recurring payment. Every month, $950 to Prosperity Bank for your mortgage." The colour drained from her father's face. "How do you know about our mortgage payments?" Alison looked at him for a long moment, something clicking into place. "Dad, who do you think has been paying your mortgage for the past 4 years?" "The bank," her mother said automatically. "It comes out automatically." "From what account?" The question hung in the air. Alison could see the moment her parents realised they didn't actually know where their mortgage payments were coming from, had never bothered to check, had just assumed everything was magically working out. "When you defaulted 4 years ago," Alison said quietly, "when Dad's business was failing and you were 3 months behind, do you remember what happened?" Her father's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I bought your mortgage," Alison continued, "through my LLC. I've been paying it ever since, $950 a month for 48 months, plus interest, plus the back payments I had to cover to prevent foreclosure." The silence was complete now, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "That's not possible," Emma whispered. Alison turned to look at her sister. "Why isn't it possible?" "Because you don't want it to be true? Because it's inconvenient for your inheritance plans?" "Because," Emma started, then stopped. "Because what? Because you can't imagine me being capable of something like that? Because in your mind, I'm still just the sister who's supposed to solve your problems and then disappear when it's time to divide up the rewards?" Jake finally found his voice. "If that's true, then why didn't you tell us?" Alison stared at him, genuinely incredulous. "Why would I need to tell you? You lived through it. You were here when the foreclosure notices came. You were here when Dad was crying about losing the house. You were here when everything magically got better. Did you think it was a miracle?" "We thought Dad worked it out with the bank," her mother said, her voice barely audible. "Dad was unemployed. What exactly did you think he worked out?" Robert Reed looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. "Ali, we didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Alison corrected. "There's a difference. You didn't want to know because knowing would mean acknowledging what I've been to this family. And acknowledging that would make what you're doing right now impossible." She picked up her purse, her hands surprisingly steady. "You want to know what's dramatic? Dramatic is finding out that the house I've been paying for is being left to people who think I'm not family enough to inherit it." "Where are you going?" her mother asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Home. To my tiny apartment that I actually pay for myself." "Alison, wait." Her father stood up, his authoritative mask finally slipping to reveal something that looked almost like fear. "We can talk about this. We can figure something out." She turned to look at him one last time. "Figure what out, Dad?" "How to make me feel better about being excluded from my own family. How to make your decisions seem fair after I find out I've been supporting the family you're giving away to someone else." "That's not," he started. "If I walk out that door right now," Alison said quietly, "don't expect me to come back." Robert Reed's face hardened, the old authority returning. "If you walk out that door, you better not come back." Alison nodded slowly. "You know what, Dad? I wasn't planning to." She looked around the table one more time at the family she'd spent 6 years supporting, protecting, and loving. They looked smaller now somehow, diminished. "But I have to admit," she said, her voice gaining strength, "I didn't expect you'd written me off before I even left." The front door closed behind her with a soft click, but it felt like the sound of something much larger ending. Alison sat in her car for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the tears or the anger or the regret to hit. Instead, what she felt was a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, she knew exactly where she stood with her family. And for the first time in years, she was going to start making decisions based on that reality. She pulled out of the driveway and headed back toward downtown Austin, toward her tiny apartment that she paid for herself, toward a life that was apparently more her own than she'd ever realized. Behind her, the house she'd been paying for glowed warmly in the darkness, full of people who'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The drive back to downtown Austin passed in a blur of traffic lights and half-remembered turns. Alison found herself taking the long way home, circling through neighborhoods she'd known since childhood, past the coffee shop where she'd studied for her SATs, past the community college where Jake had dropped out twice, past the strip mall where Emma's last art showing had attracted exactly 7 people. Everything looked different now, like seeing a familiar movie with the sound off. These weren't just streets anymore. They were the geography of a life she'd been funding without realizing it. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat. Text after text, call after call. She didn't need to look to know it was them, probably in full damage control mode now that the implications of her revelations were sinking in. Let them panic. She'd spent 6 years being available for their emergencies. Tonight she was unavailable. The 20-story glass tower that housed her apartment building rose from downtown Austin like a middle finger, pointed at the suburban sprawl where she'd grown up. She'd chosen the 19th floor specifically for the view, west toward the hill country, toward a horizon that stretched beyond the limitations of family expectations. Inside her apartment, Alison didn't turn on the lights immediately. She stood in the darkness by her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city she'd built her life in, the city where she was Alison Reed, successful entrepreneur, not Alison the family ATM. 900 square feet. Jake had said it like an insult, but standing here now, it felt like a kingdom. Every piece of furniture she'd chosen herself. Every bill she'd paid herself. Every decision made without consulting a committee of people who saw her as a resource rather than a person. When she finally flicked on the lights, her laptop was exactly where she'd left it on the dining table, surrounded by the controlled chaos of running a business. Client folders, contract drafts, her grandmother's coffee mug that she used for late-night work sessions. Real life. Her life. She opened the laptop and navigated to her business banking portal, the one she'd shown her family glimpses of, but never the full picture. Now, in the privacy of her own space, she looked at it all. The numbers were even worse than she'd remembered. Transfer to Robert Reed, mortgage payment, $950, recurring monthly for 48 months. Transfer to Emma Reed, emergency car repair, $2,100, November 15th. Transfer to Jake Reed, legal fees, $8,000, September 23rd. Transfer to Linda Reed, medical bills, $4,500, November 18th. She scrolled back further, creating a mental spreadsheet of her family's financial dependents. Transfer to Robert Reed, business loan payment, $15,000, March 2022. Transfer to Emma Reed, credit card debt, $15,500, January 2022. Transfer to Reed Family Trust, property tax, $6,800, December 2021. Transfer to Hill Country Medical, Linda Reed. Account, $12,000, August 2021. The pattern went back years, a steady hemorrhage of her success flowing directly into their stability, and the amounts were staggering, not the few hundred here and there that she'd minimized in her own mind, but tens of thousands. Over $300,000 in 6 years. Her phone rang. Mom. She declined the call. It rang again immediately. Dad. Declined. A text from Jake. We need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. Another from Emma. You're being crazy. Come back so we can fix this. And then her mother. Allie, please call me. I'm worried about you. Worried about me, Alison thought. Not worried about the house they couldn't afford. Not worried about the lifestyle they'd been living on borrowed money. Her money. Worried about her. She set the phone aside and opened a new browser window, navigating to the Texas Property Records database. It took her 20 minutes to find what she was looking for, but there it was. The deed transfer from Prosperity Bank to JC Holdings, LLC. Her company. Dated 4 years and 2 months ago. She owned their house. She actually, legally, indisputably owned the house they'd just told her she wasn't family enough to inherit. The irony was so perfect it almost made her laugh. Almost. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine, the good stuff she kept for celebrating major contracts, and called the one person who'd understand. Alison? David Chen's voice was warm despite the late hour. Everything okay? It's almost 11. David had been her business attorney since she'd incorporated 3 years ago, back when JC Holdings was just her freelance marketing work, formalized into an LLC. He was also one of the few people who knew the full extent of her family's financial situation. David, I need to ask you something about the Reed mortgage situation. A pause. Okay. What kind of something? Legally speaking, what are my rights as the mortgage holder? Another pause, longer this time. Alison, what happened? She told him. All of it. The dinner, the inheritance announcement, her family's reaction to learning she owned their mortgage. David listened without interrupting, making the occasional thoughtful noise that meant he was processing both the legal and personal implications. Jesus, he said when she finished. I'm sorry, that's brutal. Yeah, well, Alison took a sip of wine. What I need to know is, what can I legally do? You want the lawyer answer or the friend answer? Both. Friend answer, you could forgive the debt, transfer the house back to them, and walk away. Maintain family relationships, take the high road, all that. And the lawyer answer? Lawyer answer, you hold all the cards. The mortgage agreement includes standard clauses about payment default and property transfer. They've been making payments, but technically, those payments have been coming from you. If you stop making payments to yourself, which you legally can, they default. Property transfers fully to JC Holdings. They become tenants. Alison felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Not revenge, exactly. Justice. How long would that take? You could trigger it immediately. The mortgage agreement has a clause about ownership transfer in case of default. Since you're both the creditor and the entity making payments, you have complete control. And they'd become tenants in their own house. Technically, they'd become tenants in your house. Alison stared out at the city lights, processing this. What would market rate rent be on a 4-bedroom colonial in Cedar Park? For that neighborhood? Probably $2,800, maybe $3,000 a month. 3 times what they'd been paying in mortgage payments. 3 times what she'd been paying for them. David, can you draft the paperwork? Are you sure about this? Once you trigger the default, there's no going back. This will end your relationship with your family permanently. Alison thought about that. About Sunday dinners where she was treated like a bank. About her father's ultimatum at the door. About Emma's casual assumption that some people deserved inheritance and others didn't. I think they already ended it, she said quietly. I'm just making it official. Okay, I'll have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon. But Alison, sleep on this. Make sure this is what you want. After hanging up, Alison sat in her kitchen with her laptop, her wine, and the weight of a decision that would change everything. She opened a new document and began typing. Timeline of financial support. Reed family. 2019-2024. Mortgage payments. $950 per month times 48 months equals $45,600. Mortgage buyout and back payments, $89,000. Jake Reed, various loans and bail, $31,000. Emma Reed, credit cards, car repairs, living expenses, $27,500. Linda Reed, medical expenses, $16,500. Robert Reed, business loans and legal fees, $23,000. Property taxes and home repairs, $14,000. Miscellaneous family emergencies, $8,400. Total, $255,000. The number sat on her screen like an accusation. $250,000. The down payment on a mansion. A year of pure profit from her business. Her retirement fund. Her children's college fund, if she ever had children. Gone. Not invested, not saved, not building her future. Simply gone. absorbed into the comfortable suburban lifestyle of people who'd just told her she wasn't family enough to inherit the results of her own generosity. Her phone buzzed with another text. This time it was Emma. "Mum's crying. Dad's not talking. Come back and fix this." Come back and fix this, as if she were the one who'd broken something. Alison typed back, "I'll be there Sunday for dinner. We can talk then." It wasn't true exactly. She'd be there Sunday, but not to talk. Sunday, she'd be bringing paperwork. The week passed in a strange suspension of normal life. Alison went to work, attended meetings, managed campaigns, responded to client emails. On the surface, everything continued as usual. But underneath, she felt like she was planning a revolution. David's paperwork arrived Thursday morning via encrypted email. Deed transfer documents, default notices, rental agreements. Everything she needed to formalize what had been true for 4 years. She owned her family's house. She printed everything in her office after hours, when the building was empty except for security and the cleaning crew. The papers felt heavier than they should have, weighted with years of resentment and the promise of justice. Her family tried calling throughout the week, but she let everything go to voicemail. The messages evolved from confused to angry to pleading. Her mother's voice grew increasingly desperate, her father's increasingly cold. Jake and Emma seemed to alternate between fury and disbelief. By Friday, the messages stopped. Saturday night, Alison laid out clothes for Sunday dinner like she was preparing for battle. Conservative dress, professional but approachable. Hair pulled back. The armor of a successful businesswoman who'd learned not to be underestimated. She'd worn a similar outfit the day she'd closed her first major client, the day she'd bought her apartment, the day she'd incorporated JC Holdings. Today she was closing the most important deal of her life. Sunday afternoon, the Reed family house looked exactly the same as it had the previous week. Same flagstone path, same warm porch lights, same sense of suburban comfort that spoke of stable families and happy endings. Alison parked in the street instead of the driveway. Today she was a visitor. Her mother opened the door before she could knock, eyes red-rimmed and hopeful. "Ali, thank God, we've been so worried." "Hi, Mom." Alison stepped inside, noting how the house felt different now that she knew she owned it. Smaller somehow. Less significant. "Everyone here?" "We're in the dining room. I made your favorite pot roast." The same dining room where her world had imploded a week ago now felt like a courtroom. Her family sat in their usual places, but the easy comfort was gone. Jake looked sullen, Emma defensive. Her father appeared to have aged years in the past week. "Ali," he said as she sat down, "we need to clear the air." "Agreed." She placed her purse beside her chair, feeling the weight of the manila envelope inside. "What happened last week?" her mother began. "We didn't mean for it to come out like that. We just thought—" "You thought what?" "We thought you'd understand," Emma said. "You're already successful. You don't need what we need." Alison nodded slowly. "You're right. I don't need what you need." The relief on their faces was almost comical. "Because," she continued, "what I need is a family that sees me as more than a financial resource. What I need is people who remember my contributions when they're deciding my worth. What I need is parents who don't threaten to disown me when I object to being excluded from my own family." The relief faded. "Alison," her father said, his voice taking on that diplomatic tone he used in difficult situations. "We've all had time to think this week. We realize we could have handled things better." "Better how?" "We could have talked to you first," her mother said, "before making decisions. We could have explained." "Explained what? How you were planning to give away the house I've been paying for to the children who haven't contributed anything to its upkeep?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we get it. You're upset. But this doesn't have to be a big deal. We can work something out." "What kind of something?" Emma leaned forward. "Maybe we split it 3 ways instead of 2. You get a third, we each get a third." "A third of what?" "The house, the cabin, everything." Alison reached into her purse and pulled out the manila envelope. Before we discuss splitting anything, I think you should see something. She placed the first document on the table, the mortgage transfer agreement from 4 years ago. This is the deed transfer when your mortgage was sold to JC Holdings LLC. That's my company. Her father picked up the paper, his face growing pale as he read. This next one, Alison continued, laying out a second document, is the payment history. You'll notice that every mortgage payment for the past 4 years has come from the same business account that's been funding your emergencies. Her mother was shaking her head. But we've been making payments. The bank has been receiving payments from me, on your behalf, because I bought your mortgage to prevent foreclosure. Why didn't you tell us? Jake's voice was barely a whisper. I did tell you, last Sunday. But honestly, I thought you knew. I thought you just didn't want to acknowledge it because acknowledgement would mean gratitude, and gratitude would mean treating me like family instead of like a service provider. She laid out the third document. This is a default notice. As of yesterday, your mortgage payments are officially in arrears. What does that mean? Emma asked. It means, Alison said calmly, that under the terms of the mortgage agreement, full ownership of the property transfers to the creditor. Me. Silence. You can't do this, her father said finally. Actually, I can. And I am. She placed the final document on the table. This is a rental agreement. Market rate for a 4-bedroom house in Cedar Park is $2,800 per month, plus utilities. First month's rent and security deposit due within 30 days. Her mother was crying now, but quietly, as if she didn't want to draw attention to herself. You're evicting us? Jake's voice cracked. I'm offering you a rental agreement. You can accept it and stay, or you can find somewhere else to live. But the days of me subsidizing a lifestyle for people who don't consider me family are over. Alison, please. Her father's composure was cracking. This is our home. No, she said, standing up. This is my house. It's been my house for 4 years. You just didn't know it because you never bothered to ask how your financial problems got solved. She gathered the documents and put them back in the envelope. You have 30 days to decide. Rental agreement or relocation. Your choice. As she reached the door, her mother called out, What do you want from us? Alison turned back to look at them one last time. Her family, sitting around the table in the house she owned, looking lost and small, and finally understanding the weight of their own choices. I don't want anything from you anymore, she said quietly. That's the point. She walked to her car without looking back, leaving them to contemplate the true cost of their assumptions. For the first time in 6 years, Alison Reed was free. The silence that followed Alison's departure was deafening. For 3 hours, no one in the Reed family called her. She almost respected them for it. They were probably too stunned to function, sitting around their dining room table staring at rental agreements like they were written in a foreign language. When her phone finally rang at 8:47 p.m., it was her mother. Alison, sweetheart, please, can we just talk about this? We did talk about it, Mom. For 6 years. Every time you needed money, every time there was a crisis, every time I transferred funds to keep your lives stable. We talked about it constantly. You just weren't listening. But we didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Linda Reed's voice cracked. What do you want us to do? We can't afford $2,800 a month. Your father's barely making enough to cover our bills as it is. Alison looked out her apartment window at the Austin skyline, feeling strangely calm. Then I guess you'll need to find somewhere you can afford. This is our home, Allie. We raised you kids here. All your memories. My memories are of paying for that house while being told I didn't deserve to inherit it. I think I'll manage without the nostalgia. Her mother was crying now, the soft, desperate sound of someone realizing that tears wouldn't fix this. Please, baby, there has to be something we can work out. Some kind of arrangement. There is an arrangement. It's called a rental agreement. David Chen prepared it according to standard market rates. You have 29 days to decide. 29 days to come up with that kind of money, or 29 days to find somewhere else to live? Both. The call ended in silence. 20 minutes later, her father called. "Alison, this is ridiculous. You're being vindictive." "I'm being a landlord. You're destroying this family." "I'm pretty sure you did that last Sunday when you told me I wasn't family enough to inherit the house I've been paying for." "That's not what we meant." "That's exactly what you meant. You meant that Jake and Emma deserved the results of my generosity more than I did. You meant that my contributions were expected but not valued. You meant that I was useful but not important." Robert Reed's breathing was heavy on the other end of the line. "What if we apologize? What if we change the will?" "You can do whatever you want with your will, Dad. But this house isn't going to be in your estate. This house is mine." "For Christ's sake, Alison, we're your parents." "No, you're my tenants. Start acting like it." She hung up and turned off her phone. Tuesday morning brought the first sign that her family wasn't going down without a fight. Alison was in her office reviewing quarterly projections when her assistant buzzed her. "There's a woman here who says she's your sister. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's pretty insistent." Emma stood in the reception area wearing what Alison recognized as her serious meeting outfit. A black blazer she'd borrowed from their mother and dark jeans that didn't quite qualify as business casual. She looked young and out of place among the sleek furniture and motivational posters of a successful marketing firm. "We need to talk," Emma said without preamble. "We talked Sunday. I thought I was pretty clear." "Not about the house. About what you're doing to Mom and Dad." Alison led her sister into her private office, noting how Emma's eyes widened slightly at the corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows and the wall of awards from industry associations. This was Alison's world, the one she'd built while subsidizing theirs. "Mom hasn't stopped crying since Sunday," Emma said, settling into the client chair across from Alison's desk. "Dad's not sleeping. They're both terrified." "They should be. They're about to lose their house." "Your house, apparently." Emma's voice carried the bitter edge of someone who'd just learned an uncomfortable truth. "How long were you planning to keep that secret?" "It wasn't a secret. I just didn't realize I needed to provide you with quarterly financial reports on my personal investments." "Personal investments?" Emma's voice rose. "That's what you call helping your family?" "That's what I call paying someone else's mortgage for 4 years while they decide I'm not worthy of inheriting the property." Emma was quiet for a moment, studying her sister's face. "You've changed." "Good. It was overdue. This isn't you, Allie. You're not cruel." Alison leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. "You're right. I'm not cruel. If I were cruel, I would have let the bank foreclose 4 years ago. If I were cruel, I would have stopped paying your credit card bills and let you declare bankruptcy. If I were cruel, I would have let Jake sit in jail instead of posting his bail. Everything I've done has been the opposite of cruel." "Then why are you doing this now?" "Because kindness without respect is just exploitation with better marketing." Emma flinched. "We respect you." "You respect my bank account. There's a difference." "That's not fair." "You know what's not fair? Working 18-hour days to build a business while funding a family that treats me like a convenient ATM. What's not fair is sacrificing my own financial security for people who think I'm too successful to deserve consideration. What's not fair is finding out that the people I've supported for 6 years think so little of me that they don't even include me in their future plans." Alison stood up, walking to her window. 20 floors below, Austin stretched out in all directions, a city full of people building their own lives, making their own choices, taking responsibility for their own futures. "Here's what I don't understand, Emma. You and Jake are 24 years old. You've had 6 years to figure out your lives. In that time, I've started a business, bought an apartment, built a client base, and apparently bought a house. What exactly have you accomplished? Not everyone can be perfect like you." "Perfect?" Alison turned back to her sister. "Perfect would have been learning to say no 6 years ago. Perfect would have been letting you face the consequences of your choices instead of cushioning every fall. Perfect would have been making you grow up instead of enabling you to stay children." Emma's face was flushed now, tears threatening. "So this is our punishment?" for not being successful enough? This isn't punishment. This is reality. This is what happens when you depend on someone you don't respect. We do respect you. You respect what I can do for you. That's not the same thing. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. What if we could come up with the rent money? What if we found a way to pay you back for everything? With what? Jake's been unemployed for 3 months. You haven't had a steady job since college. Dad's construction business is barely breaking even. Where exactly is this money going to come from? We could get jobs, real jobs, all of us. Alison studied her sister's face, looking for signs of genuine commitment versus desperate bargaining. And you think you can collectively earn enough to pay me back $250,000 while also covering $2,800 in monthly rent? $250,000? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. That's what I've contributed to this family over the past 6 years, not including the mortgage buyout, which was another $89,000. Emma stared at her, the numbers apparently too large to process. I didn't know it was that much. Because you didn't want to know. None of you wanted to know because knowing would have meant acknowledging what you owed me, and acknowledging that would have made your inheritance plans impossible. We could change the will. Emma, stop. The will is irrelevant now. You can't inherit a house that isn't theirs to give. Emma sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of her family's situation finally settling in. When she spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. What do you want from us? I want you to grow up. I want you to take responsibility for your own lives. I want you to stop expecting other people to solve your problems. And if we do that, then maybe you'll become people I want to have a relationship with. And if we don't, then you'll find somewhere else to live. After Emma left, Alison sat in her office feeling drained but resolute. She'd expected her family to fight back, but she hadn't expected it to be so exhausting. Every conversation required her to relitigate years of financial decisions to justify actions that should have been appreciated rather than questioned. Her phone rang. Jake this time. I'm not coming to your office, he said without introduction, but we need to talk. Talk? This is insane, Ali. You can't just throw us out of our home. It's not your home, it's mine. I can do whatever I want with it. You know what I mean? I know exactly what you mean. You mean that you're entitled to live in a house you don't own, can't afford, and didn't contribute to purchasing. You mean that my money should support your lifestyle without any expectation of respect or gratitude. That's not... Jake started, then stopped. Look, I get it. We fucked up. We should have handled the inheritance thing better. The inheritance thing? The will. The way we told you. It came out wrong. How should it have come out, Jake? What's the right way to tell someone they've been supporting a family that doesn't consider them part of the family? Silence. Here's what I think happened, Alison continued. I think you and Emma and Mom and Dad sat down and had conversations about the future. Multiple conversations. You planned how to divide the assets, discussed who would get what, probably even talked about how to tell me. And in all those conversations, it never occurred to any of you that the person who'd been funding the family might deserve a voice in the discussion. We didn't think... You didn't think I'd find out? You didn't think I'd care? You didn't think I'd have opinions about being excluded from inheriting property I'd been paying for? We didn't think you'd go nuclear. Nuclear? Alison laughed, but there was no humour in it. Jake, nuclear would have been calling in all your loans immediately. Nuclear would have been demanding back payment with interest. Nuclear would have been letting the bank foreclose 4 years ago and watching you all start over with nothing. What I'm doing is business. This isn't business. This is family. No, this is what happens when family becomes business. You turned me into your banker, so I'm acting like one. We can fix this. You can fix this by signing a rental agreement or finding somewhere else to live. Those are your options. After hanging up, Alison realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear or sadness, but from adrenaline. For 6 years, she'd absorbed their crises, smoothed over their problems, enabled their dysfunction. Now, for the first time, they were being forced to confront the reality of their choices. It felt powerful and terrifying and absolutely necessary. The escalation came Thursday evening. Alison was working late in her apartment, reviewing proposals for a new client, when her building's concierge called. "Ms. Reed, there's an issue with your apartment door. Building maintenance needs to speak with you." She took the elevator down to find Carlos, the night maintenance supervisor, looking apologetic and holding what appeared to be a small crowbar. "Someone vandalized your door," he said. "Sprayed expanding foam in the lock mechanism and around the frame. The lock is completely jammed." Alison felt her blood pressure spike. "Vandalized how?" Carlos led her to the 19th floor, where her apartment door was barely recognizable. Someone had emptied what looked like multiple cans of construction-grade expanding foam into her keyhole, around the door frame, and across the electronic keypad. The foam had hardened into an ugly beige mass that made the door impossible to open. "Security cameras?" she asked, though she already suspected she knew who was responsible. "We're pulling the footage now. This had to happen in the last 2 hours. I checked this floor at 6 and everything was normal." Alison's phone was buzzing with notifications, text messages from her family. "Jake, hope you're enjoying being locked out. Now you know how it feels. Emma, maybe you'll think twice before throwing people out of their homes. Mom, Ali, I don't know what your brother did, but please call me. Dad, this has gone too far. Come home and we'll talk." She screenshotted each message, then called building security. "This is targeted harassment," she told the security director. "I need copies of all camera footage from the past 3 hours, and I'm filing a police report. Of course, I'm sorry this happened. It's not your fault, but I want to make sure whoever did this understands there are consequences." The security footage was damning. Jake Reed, clearly visible despite a baseball cap pulled low, entering the building at 7:15 p.m. carrying a gym bag. The same bag he used for construction jobs, the same bag that apparently contained multiple cans of expanding foam. The cameras caught him spray foaming her door with methodical precision, taking his time to ensure maximum damage. Alison sat in the building's security office, watching her brother destroy her property, feeling something cold and final settle in her chest. This wasn't desperation or panic. This was deliberate retaliation. This was Jake deciding that if he couldn't have what he wanted, he'd make sure she couldn't have peace. "We can have your lock replaced tonight," the security director offered. "Emergency locksmith charged to your account." "Thank you. And I'll need copies of this footage for the police report." "Already prepared." At 11 p.m, Alison stood in her newly accessible apartment, phone in hand, dialing the Austin Police Department non-emergency line. "I need to file a report for criminal mischief and vandalism," she said. "I have video evidence and text messages from the perpetrator." The police report took 45 minutes to complete. Officer Martinez was thorough and professional, reviewing the security footage twice and photographing Jake's text messages. "This is pretty clear-cut," she said. "Criminal mischief, possibly harassment. Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely." "Any idea why your brother would do this?" Alison considered how to explain 6 years of family financial dynamics in a way that would make sense to a stranger. "We're having a dispute about property ownership. He's upset that I'm exercising my legal rights. Property disputes can get ugly. You might want to consider a restraining order if this escalates." After Officer Martinez left, Alison sat in her kitchen with a glass of wine and her laptop, drafting an email to David Chen. David had attached is the police report from tonight's incident. "Jake Reed vandalized my apartment door in retaliation for the rental agreement. I have video evidence and text messages admitting culpability. I want to pursue this legally. Full charges, no plea deals, no family consideration. If they want to treat this like war, I'm prepared to win. Also, please accelerate the mortgage default timeline. I want them out in 2 weeks, not 30 days. Alison." She hit send and finished her wine, looking out at the city lights that sparkled like promises of a life free from people who confused love with money and family with obligation. Tomorrow her family would learn that actions have consequences. Tonight, she was done being their victim. The criminal charges hit the Reed family like a sledgehammer to their remaining illusions about how this would end. Jake's arrest warrant was issued on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, he'd turned himself in with a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The bail hearing was set for Monday, and Robert Reed spent the weekend frantically calling everyone he knew who might lend him the $3,000 needed to get his son out of Travis County Jail. Allison learned about the arrest from David Chen's text. It's done. Jake's booked on criminal mischief charges. Bail set at $10,000, needs $3,000 cash. Family's scrambling. She was in her office when she read it, preparing for a presentation to a Fortune 500 company that could triple her revenue. The irony wasn't lost on her. While her family was dealing with jail and bail bondsmen, she was building the business they'd been siphoning money from for years. Good, she texted back. And the eviction timeline? Accelerated to 2 weeks. They got notice this morning. For the first time in months, Allison felt something resembling peace. Not happiness exactly, but the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. Actions had consequences, choices had prices. Her family was finally learning both lessons. The weekend passed in relative quiet. No phone calls, no surprise visits, no text messages. Allison suspected her family was too busy dealing with Jake's legal situation to focus on harassing her. She spent Saturday morning at her favorite coffee shop, working on client proposals without constantly checking her phone for family crises. It was liberating. Sunday afternoon, she drove out to Zilker Park and walked the trail around Lady Bird Lake, watching kayakers and runners and families having picnics. Normal people living normal lives, people who didn't have to choose between their own financial security and their family's approval. She tried to remember the last time she'd spent a weekend without worrying about someone else's emergency. She couldn't. Monday brought Jake's bail hearing and the first crack in her family's united front. Her mother called at 2 p.m., her voice hollow with exhaustion. "We can't make bail," Linda said without preamble. "We don't have $3,000. "That's unfortunate." "Allison, he's your brother. He's a 24-year-old man who committed a crime. Being my brother doesn't make him less guilty." "Please, I know you're angry, but this is destroying our family." Allison looked out her office window at downtown Austin, at the city where she'd built a life independent of family obligations and expectations. "Mom, our family was destroyed the moment you decided I wasn't worth including in it. Everything since then has just been paperwork." "That's not true." "It is true. And you know it. The only question now is whether you want to learn from this, or keep pretending it's someone else's fault." The line went quiet for so long that Allison thought her mother had hung up. "What do you want from us?" Linda finally whispered. "I want you to grow up. I want you to take responsibility for your own lives. I want you to stop expecting me to solve problems you created." "And if we do that? Then maybe someday we can have a relationship based on something other than money." "And Jake?" "Jake made his choice when he decided to vandalize my property. He can live with the consequences." After hanging up, Allison felt drained but resolute. Every conversation with her family required her to re-establish boundaries they kept trying to cross, to explain decisions that should have been obvious. It was exhausting being the only adult in a family of grown children. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Allison was reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant buzzed her office. "There's a man here to see you. Says he's your father. He doesn't look good." Robert Reed sat in her reception area looking like he'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. His usually pressed shirts was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes shadowed with the kind of exhaustion that came from sleepless nights and impossible choices. He held a manila folder in his lap like a lifeline. "Dad." Allison stood in her office doorway, professional but not welcoming. "Can we talk, please?" She led him into her office, noting how he seemed diminished by the space. This was her world. Awards on the walls, client testimonials, evidence of success built without his help or approval. He looked around like he was seeing her life for the first time. "Jake's still in jail," he said without preamble. "I know. We can't make bail." "I know that too." He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You've changed. Everyone keeps saying that. I prefer to think I've finally started acting like myself instead of like who you needed me to be." Robert opened the manila folder and pulled out a legal document. "This is the deed to the lake cabin. I'm signing it over to you." Alison looked at the papers without touching them. "Why?" "Because you were right. About everything. We used you. We took advantage of your generosity and your love for this family. And we treated you like—" He struggled for the words. "Like a resource instead of a daughter. And you think giving me a cabin makes up for 6 years of financial exploitation? Number, I think it's a start." Alison leaned back in her chair, studying her father's face. He looked genuinely remorseful, but she'd learned not to trust appearances when it came to her family's emotional manipulations. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. That's the point. This isn't a trade. It's an acknowledgement." "An acknowledgement of what?" "That we failed you. That we took your success for granted and your support as an entitlement. That we made you feel like you weren't family while depending on you to keep the family afloat." The words hung in the air between them. Alison had waited 6 years to hear something like this, but now that it was here, it felt almost anticlimactic. "And Jake?" Her father's shoulders sagged. "Jake made his own choices. He's an adult. His consequences are his own." "And the house?" "Your house. We'll be out by the end of the week." "Where will you go?" "Your mother's sister has a place in San Antonio. We can stay there while we figure things out." Alison studied the deed transfer documents. The cabin was worth maybe $50,000, a fraction of what she'd contributed to the family over the years, but symbolic of something larger. An acknowledgement of debt, an admission of wrongdoing. "This doesn't fix everything," she said finally. "I know. This doesn't mean we go back to how things were. I know that too. And it doesn't mean I'm going to start subsidizing your lives again. I wouldn't ask you to." Alison picked up the papers, scanning the legal language that would transfer ownership of the property her family had planned to leave to Jake and Emma. Why now? Why not 2 weeks ago, or 2 months ago, or 2 years ago? Her father was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because I finally understand what we lost. Not the house, not the money. You. We lost you. And it was our own fault. You lost me the moment you decided I wasn't family enough to inherit property I'd been paying for." "You're right." "I'm right, but it's too late to matter." Robert Reed nodded slowly, accepting the judgment. "Maybe. But I needed you to know that I understand what we did, and I needed to do something that wasn't about what we needed from you." He stood up, looking older and more fragile than she'd ever seen him. "I'm proud of you, Alison. Not because of your success, or your business, or the money you make. I'm proud of you for finally standing up to us. It shouldn't have taken me this long. No, it shouldn't have. But you did it. And maybe that's enough." After he left, Alison sat in her office holding the deed to a cabin she'd visited maybe 10 times in her life. It wasn't about the property. It was about the acknowledgement that her father had finally seen her as something other than a source of emergency funding. It was 6 years too late, but it was something. A year later, the grand opening of the Chosen Family Foundation took place on a crisp October morning in a renovated warehouse in East Austin. Alison stood at the podium looking out at 200 people, survivors of financial abuse, social workers, attorneys, journalists, and advocates who believed that family shouldn't be a license for exploitation. Her own family wasn't there. Jake was serving 90 days in county jail for the vandalism charges, followed by 2 years probation. Emma had moved to Portland with friends, claiming she needed space to find herself. Her parents were living in San Antonio, trying to rebuild their lives on their own resources for the first time in decades. Alison missed them sometimes, but it was the kind of missing you feel for people you used to know, not the desperate longing for family approval that had driven her for so many years. Financial abuse in families is one of the most underreported forms of domestic violence, she said to the assembled crowd. We don't talk about it because it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that the people who are supposed to love us most can also exploit us most effectively. In the front row, David Chen smiled encouragingly. Next to him sat Dr. Patricia Morales, the therapist who'd helped Alison understand that loving someone doesn't require sacrificing yourself for them. Behind them were her employees, her real friends, the chosen family she'd built from people who valued her for who she was, rather than what she could provide. The Chosen Family Foundation exists to help people understand that they are not obligated to set themselves on fire to keep other people warm, Alison continued. That love without respect is just exploitation with better marketing. That family is about more than blood. It's about mutual support, genuine care, and reciprocal respect. She looked around the room at faces that reflected her own journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Some of you may lose relationships when you start setting boundaries. Some of you may discover that people you thought loved you actually just loved what you could do for them. And that's going to hurt. But on the other side of that hurt is something better. The chance to build relationships based on who you are rather than what you can provide. The applause was warm and sustained. After the formal program, people approached her with their own stories. Daughters supporting entire extended families, sons paying siblings' rent while living paycheck to paycheck, parents enabling adult children who refused to take responsibility for their own lives. "Thank you," said a woman in her 40s who looked exhausted in the way that comes from carrying other people's problems. "I've been supporting my sister's family for 8 years. I didn't know I was allowed to stop." "You're allowed to have your own life," Alison told her. "You're allowed to save for your own future. You're allowed to say no." As the crowd thinned out, Alison found herself standing alone in the space she'd created, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on her own terms. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the article about your foundation in the Austin Business Journal. Proud of what you've built. Dad." She stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. Sadness for what they'd lost, relief for what she'd gained, acceptance that some stories don't have happy endings, just necessary ones. She typed back, "Thank you. I hope you're well." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement that they were all moving forward in their own ways, learning to live with the consequences of their choices. Alison put her phone away and looked around the foundation office one more time. Tomorrow she'd start helping other people reclaim their lives from families who confused love with money and obligation with affection. Tonight she was going home to her apartment, the one she paid for herself, in the city she'd chosen, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was, rather than what she could provide. For the first time in her adult life, Alison Reed was exactly where she belonged. 3 years after the last family dinner, Alison received a wedding invitation in the mail. Emma was getting married to someone named Marcus, a graphic designer she'd met in Portland. The invitation was simple and elegant, nothing like the elaborate fantasy wedding Emma had always talked about. There was a handwritten note on the back. "Ali, I know we haven't talked, but I wanted you to know that I'm happy. Really happy for the first time in years. I got a job I love, I'm paying my own bills, and I met someone who likes me for me, not for what I can do for him. I understand now why you did what you did. I hope you're happy too. Love, Emma." Alison sat in her new house, a craftsman bungalow in South Austin that she'd bought with the profits from JC Holdings, and read the note 3 times. Then she went to her computer and ordered a wedding gift, a nice set of dishes from the registry, with a card that said simply, "Wishing you both happiness and independence. Congratulations." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was recognition that sometimes people do grow up, do learn from their mistakes, do become worth knowing. Some families are born, others are chosen. The lucky ones get both. Alison had chosen hers, and it was enough.